American attention and that of the world is focused squarely on Iraq and the threat from the group we now know as ISIS. But as all too often happens, too much attention being paid to one hotspot leaves what could be a disastrous hole in our thinking and preparation. For what is happening in Yemen is a bigger part of the overall picture than some are willing to admit. A place where America believes it's doing some good, but may just be kidding itself again. Welcome to MidPoint. The Executive Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security, Dr. Peter Pry, joins us today. Dr. Pry, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It is interesting when we look at Yemen because it is one of those places that, quite frankly, we don't hear a tremendous amount about. But in Yemen, you are talking about an instance here where the electricity basically has gone out in Yemen, and this is something that we need to pay closer attention to. Tell us a little bit more about exactly what's happening.
I'm not getting any.
One moment, I believe we're having a problem with the microphone. Ah, there we are. Sorry about that, everybody. We had a technical problem with the microphone. Dr. Pry, you still with us?
I can hear you now.
I
yes.
apologize. Thank you. We just had a problem with the microphone. Let's get back to it now. We're focusing on Yemen. There is an interesting happening in Yemen. It's simply, it works around the power grid here. You've studied this. You've looked at this. The terrorists blacking out the country of Yemen, which is important to the United States no matter how we look at it. Tell us a little bit more about why we should be paying more attention to what's going on there with this blackout possibility.
I'm really surprised that this is not a bigger story. It has been neglected by the mainstream media. On June 9th, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, which is one of the most aggressive Al-Qaeda affiliates, used mortars and artillery to destroy power line towers and blacked out the entire nation of Yemen for a day or two. This is the first time in history that terrorists have attacked the power grid and blacked out an entire nation. So it's a highly significant development. It proves that Al-Qaeda and terrorist groups are aware of the key societal vulnerability that is the power grid. We've been very concerned that they may exploit this in the future. In fact, arguably, it's more important development than what's happening in northern Iraq, because AQAP has been very aggressive in trying to attack the United States. They're the ones, for example, that sank the USS Cole. The failure to retaliate for the Cole is what resulted in the 9/11 Holocaust that killed 3,000 Americans, and they have persisted in trying to come up with ingenious ways to deliver explosives to the United States via airliners using bombs disguised as soft drinks and underclothing and printing cartridges. Recently, we've become extremely concerned about the possibility of attacks on the electric power grid because last April 16th, there was an attack on the Metcalf substation outside San Jose, California that looked like some kind of professional terrorist attack that, had it succeeded, could have blacked out the Silicon Valley and perhaps much of the west coast of the United States. A subsequent study by the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission warns that if just 9 key substations were attacked in the United States, it could black out the whole U.S. national power grid for weeks or months. So we're concerned that maybe what happened in Yemen is a dry run or an experiment by terrorists to see how good they are at blacking out a national power grid so they could then turn and use this against the United States.
You use the phrase ingenious ways in here. It seems to me that still in America, maybe not just in America, but around the world as well, that sometimes those who look at security still remain a little bit naive when we talk about Al-Qaeda and some of these other terrorist groups, that perhaps we still don't think that they are able to reach this level of sophisticated technology in order to strike back at America. Is it fair to say that we still underestimate them in so many ways?
Well, we do grossly underestimate them, and you don't need highly sophisticated technology to take out the power grid, as was demonstrated in Yemen. I mean, these mortars and rocket-propelled grenade launchers are not sophisticated weapons. The attack on the San Jose transformer substation last year was done with AK-47s. That's a standard sidearm for terrorist groups all over the world. So they could use those kinds of instruments, to basically take out the whole U.S. power grid. But we are concerned about more sophisticated attacks, too, particularly a nuclear EMP attack, which is the ultimate nightmare scenario. And it may be one of the reasons that Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is interested in basically trying to take over the nation of Yemen. because Yemen had 15 Scud-B missiles that it got from North Korea. Simultaneously with what's going on in northern Iraq, another thing that's happening is the Taliban have been on the offensive. They attacked the international airport in Pakistan. Now, Pakistan is a nuclear weapons state, and we're concerned about Iran becoming a nuclear weapons state. If these guys got hold of just one nuclear weapon that from the Pakistanis or from the Iranians, they could put it on one of those Scud missiles, bring a freighter off our shores, and launch a high-altitude nuclear EMP attack that would black out the U.S. electric grid potentially for more than a year. The Congressional EMP Commission on which I served estimated that if you had a protracted national blackout lasting a year, it could kill 9 of 10 Americans by starvation, disease, and societal collapse. And we know the Iranians are aware of this. They have written in their open source military writings about taking down the United States in exactly that way. And they are the world's leading sponsor of international terrorism.
We always get to something like this and we think they can do it. They may do it. They're preparing to do it. But I will guarantee that the American public will ask a simple question. Okay, you've given us what seemed like, and to many people this seems like a science fiction novel, if you will, talk of EMP and taking out a power grid because it's been used in so many movies and people still don't think it actually will happen. But people will ask, you've given us all the possibilities now, could this really happen? How quick could this happen? How alert should we be? Because to some people, as I said, it's still science fiction.
Well, it's not science fiction in Yemen. They did it in Yemen and blacked out the whole country. And it's not science fiction in Mexico. Just a few days before Halloween, in fact, it was on the very day that National Geographic ran a documentary called American Blackout, warning about the possibility of terrorist attacks that could take down the national electric grid. On that very day, I think it was the 27th of October, the Knights Templars drug cartel, they're a terrorist drug cartel in Mexico. They blacked out a whole province in Mexico, put 420,000 people into blackout so they could go into the towns and villages and execute leaders opposed to the drug trade. Now, they are not a very sophisticated terrorist group. When Neanderthals like the Knights Templars have figured out that the electric grid is a major societal vulnerability, and given the open borders we have with Mexico and the interest that a lot of these drug cartels have for opposing the United States, a war on drugs, we'd better start watching out. If the Knights Templars can do what they did to Mexico and Al-Qaeda, Arabian Peninsula, did what they did in Yemen, what are the rest of Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, what are they planning for us? We need to be very concerned about this. This isn't some far distant theoretical threat. As I said before, and you don't need a nuclear weapon. We should be concerned about that. Nobody really knows how close Iran is to the bomb. Pakistan has already got the bomb. North Korea orbited a satellite over our country just last year during the nuclear crisis. It was the most serious nuclear crisis we ever had with North Korea. You may recall the president took it so seriously. We were flying B-2 bombers over the demilitarized zone and beefed up the national missile defenses. They sent their KSM-3 satellite right over the United States at the ideal altitude for doing an EMP attack that would black out the country. And that was clearly a demonstration of their capability to do something like that. And they've got nuclear weapons. They've got the capability to do it now.
All right. And so with about a minute left here, I do have to ask you this very pointed question, because if we're talking about all this, and it could happen, in your opinion, is this current administration doing something about it that quietly we're not hearing about? Or again, in your opinion, are they largely ignoring this and sort of almost hoping it will go away or move on to somebody else's plate?
The White House and the Congress are both trying to do something about it, but Washington is so broken they haven't been able to succeed. This is not a Republican-Democrat thing. There's bipartisan support for doing something. But all you have to do is, all the electric power industry has to do, and this is what has happened, if you can get one person on the committee, you can thwart supermajorities that are in favor of moving bills or taking action from the White House, because the electric power grid in the United States is owned by 3,000 private utilities. The president and the Congress don't have the authority to force them to harden the grid. We've been trying to pass legislation. We're going to the state level, though, and there are our states, Maine, Virginia, and Arizona, this year passed bills to start hardening their electric grid. There's slow progress being made. But the problem is not technological, and it isn't money. It doesn't cost that much. It's political. the lawyers are going to get us killed in the end.
That is something I think we can end on and unfortunately say we've heard a million times before, unfortunately. Dr. Peter Pry, thank you so much for joining us. We will talk again.
Thank you so much for having me.
The lawyers are going to get us killed. Wow. Think about this for a moment. He is right. It is a possibility. Just a quick note, coming up after the break, it's time to get into the arena. Republican, Democrat, and all the issues, including something of a shocking announcement that has come in the last hour from Iraq. It's all coming up here on MidPoint, where we question everything.